Our next part of the webinar is a panel discussion. And for that, I hand it over to the captain of the panel discussion, Mrs. Chandana Bhuya. Over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. And it was a very insightful session. Really, I really enjoyed all the answers also. And now, without wasting a single minute, I would like to go to our next speaker, which is Dr. Priyaranjan Avinash. So I have some questions for you, but I guess I would like to. We all would like to listen to you first. So the topic which Dr. Avinash will focus on is on comorbidities and differential diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So, Dr. Avinash, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chandana. And first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Dalwai for a very, it was an excellent talk. And he really answered all the questions in a way that I would say probably have not left any doubt in the questioner's mind. Now, my job has been made very easy with this really nice, elaborate presentation by Dr. Dalwai. So what I will be doing, and moreover, I also have, we do have paucity of time. So in that case, I would try and shorten my presentation. So I'll just share my screen. Is my slide visible?
Yes, Avinash.
Hello.
It is visible.
Okay, so very well. I will take it from the from where Dr. Dalwai had left in his presentation about the term autism itself. Now, interestingly, before anybody could even understand autism as a childhood disorder, a famous psychiatrist, Dr. Bloiler, I think it was in the early 20th century, somewhere around 1910 or 11, he was a Swiss psychiatrist who coined this term autism first. And when he coined this term autism, he actually was using this term specifically for schizophrenia. Now, there was a huge debate in the early time of understanding of autism as well as childhood schizophrenia, whether autism is nothing but just childhood schizophrenia. And then Dr. Leo Kanner, he came with this concept of childhood autism, and he proposed that autism or autistic spectrum disorder, as we know now, is an entirely different entity from schizophrenia, even though there are certain very gross similarities when it comes to social and language skills. The other day, I think I had a discussion with Chandana regarding how do you differentiate some disintegrative disorders from autism disorder. Now, to understand autism, there is basically a triad, and of this triad, the most important factor that need to be present, or that has to be present, I would say, if there is one pathognomic of autism, then that is poor social reciprocation. And language now, as DSM-5 has tried to explain, says that language is nothing but a way of social expression only. So unlike the previous triad, which was a poor social reciprocation, and a problem in language communication, and repetitive, rhythmic, or stereotypical behavior, now it has become a triad, it has become a dyad, from triad to dyad. Now it is primarily a problem of either impaired social communication and or repetitive restrictive pattern of behavior. And the language part has been incorporated in the social communication, while the repetitive behavior, both hyper and hypo reactivity to sensory stimulus, has also been incorporated as an understanding to be with repetitive and stereotypical behavior. I would not go into this detail of how ICD-11 is going to change the way we diagnose autism spectrum disorder, or how DSM-5 has brought newer changes in the terminology itself, because I think we do not have time for that. Now, coming to my core topic, of differential diagnosis and comorbidities. I tried to classify the differential diagnosis in various broad headings, and going by the lifespan approach of the heading, the most common differential diagnosis or the other diagnosis that we have to keep in mind whenever we are going to diagnose autism spectrum disorder. And as Dr. Dalwai rightly said, that you don't have to really label somebody with autism spectrum disorder. But having said that, yes, we do require a diagnosis to go ahead with the treatment and management plan. So in that case, among the neurodevelopmental disorders, specific language delay or other language-related disorders, which are where the primary problem is only language, it could be either expressive or receptive, intellectual disability or global developmental delay. Even sometimes learning disability is readily confused with autism spectrum disorder, especially in the high functioning autism spectrum disorders. Developmental coordination disorders and various other motor disorders can also be sometimes be confused with autism spectrum disorder, especially with predominant repetitive and stereotypical motor behavior. Among the mental and behavioral disorders, which are sometimes can be the differential diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, is ADHD definitely the number one. Childhood mood disorders, anxiety disorder, as the case that Dr. Dalwai, somebody had asked that my child is around 2 or 3 years old, and whenever we approach him, he becomes probably anxious, and then he runs away and starts jumping. So a child presents in a case of anxiety disorder in a very different manner than a typical adult would present. So sometimes anxiety disorder can also be a differential diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder. Attachment disorders like reactive attachment disorder can be also one of the differential diagnosis. Sometimes ODD, rather than a differential diagnosis, ODD, opposition defiant disorder, is a rather comorbidity, which is more commonly seen with children with autism spectrum disorder. Sometimes conduct disorder can be a comorbidity, but not so common. Conditions in which there is developmental regression. So there was a developmental delay or neurodevelopmental disorder. Among the broad cluster of developmental regression, Rett syndrome, which is only seen in women, with the girls, and but the classic part to differentiate Rett syndrome from other regressive disorders like post-encephalopathy regression or epileptic regression or CDD is that Rett syndrome, first, it is seen only in girls. Second, a very classical symptom is that there is a loss of previously learned hand motor skills or a repetitive flapping tremor and flapping hand movement, etc., which is seen in Rett syndrome. And one more thing is that usually the regression in Rett syndrome happens before the 2 years of age, unlike CDD, which is relatively later. So in CDD, it is usually at least 3 years the child develops normally and then starts regressing. On the other hand, Rett syndrome, the child starts regressing after somewhere around 2 years of age. Other conditions which can also sometimes be one of the differentials and can lead to some confusion in diagnosis could be hearing impairment. I mean, how much we can emphasize about that, how it is important to check for the hearing impairment in a child before diagnosing him or her with autism spectrum disorder. And selective mutism, another differential, I would say, but it is often the parent who get confused that my child who becomes so socially recluse to the extent that he becomes absolutely quiet and mute when he is visiting a family function or somebody visits the house. Is my child suffering from autism spectrum disorder? Not so, because selective mutism is, as the name suggests, the terminology suggests, itself is selective. On the other hand, autism spectrum disorder is pervasive. This is how autism spectrum disorder was earlier understood. It used to come under the broad heading of PDD, that is pervasive developmental disorder. So there is a pervasiveness in autism spectrum disorder, while there is a selectivism in selective mutism. Now, moving to comorbidities, some of the differential diagnoses again are also comorbid, like ADHD, anxiety, mood disorder, etc. A very common comorbidity that I have found in very limited experience that I would say I have in comparison to some of the other delegates here is tics and other tics-like disorders like Tourette syndrome. OCD, there is a triad of tics, ADHD, and OCD. So many of the children do have the triad of all three. They may have some tics, They may also have ADHD when they start growing up. And eventually, when they reach the age of somewhere around adolescent age group, they start having symptoms classically appearing like obsessive or compulsive, predominantly compulsive behaviors. Some of these compulsive behaviors can manifest in the form of self-injurious behavior. There was one gentleman probably or a lady who had asked this question, that how do you control the aggression in a child with autism spectrum disorder? Many a times the aggression in a child with autism spectrum disorder is nothing but a self-injurious behavior, and that self-injurious behavior also had a different types of origin, and based on the origin, the cause behind the self-injurious behavior, the treatment varies. It is definitely the combination of pharmacotherapy and various behavioral and psychotherapies, but you need to first find out what could be the primary cause behind this self-injurious behavior. Many other comorbidities like speech and language disorder that I've already mentioned, based on what kind of speech and language disorder is predominantly seen, we can differentiate whether this child is predominantly having speech and language impairment only, or it is moving more towards autism spectrum disorder. So as you can see, this table, this table I have just copied from the latest version of Rutter's Child Psychiatry, and you see this table. So with the shading of those tables, you can see that unlike the specific language impairments, or the children with autism spectrum disorders have more problem in the pragmatic and the semantic part of the language, unlike the specific language impairment, where the problem is predominantly more of phonological and grammatical impairment. So this is how it can be differentiated from specific language impairment to autism spectrum disorders. Many medical and genetic problems can also be comorbid, as many times some of the autism spectrum disorders are genetic, as Dr. Dalwai rightly mentioned, that not every genetic illness has to be hereditary as well. So let's not go into the detail of what are the other comorbidities, but epilepsy is definitely one of the commonest. Various chromosomal disorders can be there. Some functional problems can also be seen very often as a comorbidity with autism spectrum disorder. And last, this is my last slide, the penultimate slide, I would say. When it comes to self-injurious behavior, we need to understand the concept of self-injurious behavior in autism child in these 5 or 6 broad headings. Whether it is predominantly a behavior that is being positively reinforced, whether it is a behavior that is negatively reinforced, he is trying to escape from some negative stimulus, that's why he's doing that behavior, whether it is nothing but just self-stimulation behavior, as repetitive stereotypical movement is one of the classical triad of autism spectrum disorder. So it's nothing but just a repetitive behavior, or it could be a functional problem because the child is not able to communicate properly. So that's why he is out of frustration doing some injurious behavior. Or there is a long list of neurochemical hypotheses which says both dopamine deficiency hypothesis as well as dopamine insensitization, as well as serotonergic and dopamine dysfunction. And a very interesting newer theory that is coming is the opioid excess hypothesis, which says that children with autism spectrum disorder have a relatively higher level of endogenous opioid, that is endorphin, which results in analgesia. So when they hurt themselves, they don't even feel pain because there is an excess of opioid. And this could be one of the reasons why they're behaving this self-injurious behavior, which may to others appear very painful. Sometimes this behavior are nothing but even some type of an addiction, and there is an addiction hypothesis has also been given. Based on these various hypotheses, the treatment for self-injurious behavior differs. Now, I don't know how much time I have, or should I wait for the specific question, but there are a list of medications that can be used in these kind of self-injurious behavior, and that I will probably take question-wise. So eventually, the disorders, the comorbidities that is seen in children with autism spectrum disorder, based on a different age group, in the early age group, it is predominantly anxiety, ADHD, and social phobia, etc. In the early adolescent age group, it is again anxiety, ADHD, and ODD. And in adulthood, again anxiety. But as you see, anxiety is common in all this age group, but the cause behind this anxiety differs. Initially, the atypical interaction, the children of autism spectrum disorder have an atypical interaction with the society, with parents, with other people, that can lead to anxiety. And later on in their age, as intellectual disability is also very common with children with autism spectrum disorder, this leads to limited educational achievement and selective and restricted social experience, which can further lead to anxiety in adulthood. So that brings my presentation to the end. And if there is any question primarily based on this comorbidity and differential diagnosis, these are most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avinash. So on the basis of your presentation, I have a question for you. Like there are almost 31% of children with autism has intellectual disability. So, but at the same time, a child with intellectual disability as well as social anxiety, how can we differentiate between these two?
Can you say it again?
Yes, like as we all know that autistic children, they have like 31% of children with autism has got intellectual disability as well. But at the same time, a child with intellectual disability who also have a like high social anxiety and some compulsive behavior due to the anxiety disorder, how can we differentiate between these two, that whether the child actually has autism or the child is having intellectual disability and this is just a form of anxiety disorder?
See, Chandna, as I told in my deliberation also, that autism need to be understood more as a social disorder than an intellectual disorder. Okay. So intellectual disability, so many people, especially parents, they watch some movies and they come up with this idea that my child may have autism, but he's a gifted child who will have some very specific skill or genius, right? Because that is what we see in the movies. But the irony or the reality truth is that intellectual disability is very common in children with autism spectrum disorder. But more than the intellectual disability, it is the disability in the socio-adaptive functioning, which is more of an hindrance or more of a problem in children with autism spectrum disorder than just mere intellectual disability or inability to perform or be skillful as age appropriate. Children with autism spectrum disorder will start having subtle symptoms of social reciprocal problem in social reciprocal behavior and language in the very as early as few months, actually, as early as when he or she has been 1 year, less than 1 year before his or her first birthday. The child can start showing the subtle signs, very subtle signs of poor language. And when I say language, it need not have to be expressive language, receptive language also. If we have ruled out other language problems and hearing impairment, etc., and still the child is having problem in receptive language or expressive language, problem in social reciprocation, problem in social smile, problem in eye contact, problem in other socially appropriate, age appropriate social interaction and behavior, then the child most likely has autism spectrum disorder or rather than intellectual disability. So that is how we need to differentiate. I mean, I think there is nothing can suffice a very detailed, good history when it comes to diagnosing any condition, we all know, and specifically for autism spectrum disorder.
So that your answer leads to the next question, actually. So in case of CDD, childhood disintegration disorder, so the child has all the right developmental milestones, like I mean all in accurate timing, and then after 2 years of age, there is a sudden regression happening. So how do we understand? I mean, and at the same time, simultaneously, emotional trauma, some kind of situation happened at home front or somewhere, I mean, with the child. So how can we differentiate that the regression is happening because of emotional trauma, or this is a sign of CDD?
Yes.
Like in this case, the history, history is like, it's clear, completely clear history. No complication, no, poor social interaction, nothing.
Okay. So the question, see, you need to understand how to differentiate childhood disintegrative disorder regression from other type of regression. Not every regression presents in the same manner. A typical CDD regression presents in the manner that the child loses the previously learned skills. And when we say skills, it includes all skills: social skills, language skills, motor skills, behavioral skills, toilet skills, every skill possible, right?
Okay.
And while in the case of regression, the child does not start having poor social reciprocal behavior. The child rather become more clingy. Especially the regression that is seen in emotional trauma, what happens to the child, rather than the child becoming more social reciprocation becoming very difficult, as we see in ASD or CDD, children with emotional trauma leading to regression have a very different kind of presentation. They start becoming more clingy to their mother or to family. They start I would say, avoiding any kind of social interaction when it comes to people from outside the family. But when it comes to family or somebody with whom the child is very attached, he becomes more clingy. Second thing, they become very emotionally labile. The regression that is seen in children, especially after some kind of emotional trauma, it could be some kind of a stress, some kind of traumatic, anything it could be. Sometimes this kind of regression is also seen in children when their younger sibling is born. So that regression sometimes present in a way because they want attention. Because they are not getting the attention, the whole family is attentive towards the new member in the family, and they have to regress to get the attention back. So unlike the regression that you see in various kind of emotional trauma, a typical CDD regression appears the same as ASD. The only difference is that the child was normal up to a certain age, which is usually minimum 3 years, and then starts regressing and becomes just like a child with ASD. With all the cluster of symptoms, as I mentioned, the social reciprocal behavior and the language and the motor skills, everything. But the emotional trauma child has a different kind of regression.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. So before going to take parents' questions, I would like to discuss a case, if that is okay.
Chandana, just before you discuss a case, I would just like to add something to Avinash's slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So Avinash, there's like, just for information of everybody, there's another group of children who are now diagnosed with pragmatic communication disorder. And the symptoms that these children show are, very, very similar to those shown by children with autism spectrum disorder. Just that this group of children would not have any repetitive or stereotypical behavior like, which is generally seen in children with autism spectrum disorder. But otherwise, communication-wise, they would not be using language appropriately in a meaningful way, or they'll have difficulty in expressing their feelings and emotions. They'll have difficulty in maintaining a topic or even turn-taking skills. So symptoms which are very, very, very similar to children having autism spectrum disorder. But in children with having pragmatic communication disorder, it is, the features are apparent only at the age of, around 4 to 5 years, when we actually expect a typically developing child to develop age-appropriate speech and language skills. So that is a time when it is actually apparent and visible to parents or even for the practitioners that this child is having an issue. On the other hand, autistic traits are very visible. I mean, we can even diagnose, not diagnose in the sense that write it down on paper, but we can at least start intervening a child showing autistic symptoms as early as, I think, 12 to 18 months, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, so that is what I wanted to add to your differential diagnosis.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. See, now DSM-5 has brought in this condition also as one of the conditions under the heading of language disabilities or language disorders. And pragmatism of the language skill is one of the highest language skill, right? And as we grow older and older, our pragmatic language skills keep improving. The vocabulary, the grammeme, the phonemes, and everything does not improve much after a certain age. But how we use that language as we grow older starts developing with the fineness of the language, like to understand the ability to understand sarcasm, the ability to understand a statement which has a double binding. Now, these kind of pragmatism in the language comes only after a certain age. So as you said it, but then what happens that it is not really children with autism spectrum disorder would have not just problem with language, they will also have problem with other aspects of their development, as you rightly said.
Yeah.
True.
That is how we will have to differentially diagnose, because these children would also, seem like they are having ASD, but I mean, there are high chances that we just, misdiagnose somebody with ASD.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
True.
So when we are talking about misdiagnosis, I'm also curious about schizoid personality disorder. So don't they also look like ASD?
See, that is what I was saying, that the concept of autism actually went from the psychiatrist to the pediatrician, not the other way around. So
can I add here something, if you don't mind, Avinash?
Yeah, why not?
Yes, of course.
Just one line I would like, because when it comes to PDs, it's one of my very favorite
topics. I know. I was actually thinking of asking this question.
No, I just wanted to. Avinash can obviously take it forward. The thing is in schizoid, the thing is in autistics, basically, there are delays in developmental milestones in which I think in schizoid personality, that's not the fact. That's the major difference, basically. You can go ahead, Avinash. I was just waiting to say this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There is no diagnostic exclusion per se, which say that if there is developmental delay, then that child cannot have schizoid personality. The primary difference is that personality develops much later.
Yeah.
While autism spectrum disorders presents much earlier. So you would see it. You don't have to wait till 14 or 15 or 18 years of age to diagnose somebody as autism spectrum disorder. Having said that, a very interesting, rather I would say a very subtle change in the DSM-5 criteria for autism spectrum disorder is that now they have gone away with the cutoff for the age, which was earlier there. As you can see that earlier the age cutoff was there, that by 3 years of the age symptoms should come. If not prospectively, then at least retrospectively, which DSM-5 has gone away with. It says that it can sometimes even come or may become apparent at a much later age when the social skills of the child and the social demands from the child are at a loggerhead. You understand? So they have not specified the exact age. They say that at times it is possible that the child may be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder much later. But yes, the primary difference is this only.
Of course. Yeah, I'll directly go to the case discussion. So there is a case, he is 25 months old and his developments were all fine.
Say it again, how many months old you said?
25 months old. And his developments are all fine. All milestones are required on time. And then, but there is an incident happened when he was 11 months old. He had an accident with a monkey and he got a shock. And after that, he was having nightmares, which is still continuing. And then when he just crossed his 2 years of age, there is another incident happened. A group of monkey attacked their house. When this child got terribly shocked, it was kind of a trauma to the child. And after that, he's prominently, regressed. He's losing all the skills, not only linguistic skills, but social interaction. And he's also has, started to develop repetitive behavior, but it is not that prominent yet. So whether it is a case of CDD or whether it is a case of regression due to emotional trauma.
So right, that is what we were discussing before. That how do you differentiate A type A regression from B regression, right? Regression is a regression. So we need to see the subtle symptoms of what kind of regression, or we need to be wakeful, watchful, right? I mean, it's not that we have to diagnose at that particular moment only. Any regression due to trauma are usually not permanent.
Okay, yeah.
And childhood disintegrative disorder regression is permanent. That is why it is diagnosed as disintegration. That it disintegrates, it breaks away. So the regression in CDD is permanent, while the regression in emotional trauma are usually not permanent.
Okay.
As well as the core symptoms, as I said, it can differ. Now, in a child of 2.5-year-old, 24 months, you said, 25 months, you said.
25
that is 2 years and 1 month only. So, and I wonder how that child would explain his nightmares at 11 months. I mean, it's difficult, because most of the children at 11 months do not have enough language skills to tell in the morning.
Yeah, the parents were reporting that, he's having bed dreams probably because he's crying, at sleep.
I understand.
And that happened immediately after the incident. Yeah.
What happens that, yes, I totally understand. But then we need to see that whether it was really nightmare or night terror, which are two different entities.
Yes.
A child with, or anybody with nightmare usually remember that nightmare and tell them later on when they wake up that, okay, I was seeing this. Or in the night terror, the child just wakes up crying, or the man or anybody, it can happen in an adult also, and just does not remember what happened and wakes up with a shock, right? Or wakes up with a lot of emotional outbursts. So we need to first see that whether this incident of monkeys coming in the house has really left a significant trauma over the child, thought, emotions, etc. That is one thing. And second, we need to be wakeful and watchful. And third, we need to keep a watch on those real symptoms. Which are the symptoms that are coming back? Disintegration, regression. What are the symptoms that are coming back? Classically, again, when it comes to losing the previously learned skills, as I said, a very commonly seen repetitive behavior is the hand flapping or banging, which is very, very, I would say, pathognomic, or a very telltale sign of CG, or have not been often reported in other type of regression.
Okay.
I think somebody's video need to be switched off.
Please, can you mute other people? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll pick up the questions now. I'll go to the questions. Okay. One question from a parent. Dr. Avinash, I have seen many parents struggling with differential diagnosis at early childhood age or otherwise. I would like your take on establishing baseline and starting treatment approaches while diagnostics. Kids with SPD would present with a lot of symptoms similar to anxiety disorder early on.
Chandana, I could not hear the question properly. Can you just summarize and tell me what exactly was the question?
It's from Mr. Chand or Mrs. Chand Romil. Can you please? This is a direct message to me.
I'm reading the chat. I'm not.
No. It's a direct message to me actually. That's why I think you won't be able to see that.
Yeah. Can you summarize and ask me the question then from your end?
Yeah. So.
Hello. Yes. Hello, Dr. Bhuiyan. Dr. Avinash.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Romil over here. I had a question. I'm not a parent actually, so I had a question that usually as a professional also the diagnosis can be done, but can treatment be started before even a diagnosis is reached?
Absolutely. I think Dr. Dalwai was emphasizing this thing only, that you don't have to wait for the diagnosis. You might rather not make a diagnosis. Okay, so if whatever dysfunction or disability that you observe, based on that, specific treatment formulations and plan can be made, and the diagnosis can wait. So I totally agree with this, that you don't lose the precious time while the diagnosis process is going on, because most of these diagnostic protocols and process are very lengthy. Sometimes they require appointment from therapists, speech therapists, psychiatrists, neurologists, pediatrician, which may take at certain centers even 1 year. So the therapy should not wait. The therapy based on symptom, not based on diagnosis, based on symptom, based on presentation, or the symptom-based approach, that is what it is called, can start from the time any symptom or any dysfunction is observable.
Before they work on it.
Thank you, Romil sir, for your valuable input. I would just like to introduce him. Romil sir has been my teacher at EYJ.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I think it's like around 3:30, 4:30 in the States now. Thank you so much.
It's 5:45. Yeah. No
so
problem, Manashi.
You kept your promise of joining this webinar. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your question, and I'm very sorry for pronouncing your name wrong. I'm very sorry for
No
that.
problem. No problem.
Yeah, that gives us a lot of clarity. Thank you. So I would like to go to the next question, which is from Rosina, who is a speech language pathologist in W. Pratiksha, Guwahati. Hi, Dr. Avinash. My question is there any medication for self-injurious behavior or any specific therapy for such case?
Yeah, so as I was telling, that self-injurious behavior need to be understood first, that what could be the cause behind self-injurious behavior. If the pattern is more of an obsessive or compulsive repetitive behavior, then the treatment obviously goes in the line of that. So you usually choose SSRI for that. If this is more like an impulsive behavior or out of frustration, then we go for a very low dose antipsychotic, atypical antipsychotic. So it depends on what type of aggressive behavior is observed, and that requires a very keen observation of seeing those behavior, that when does that child do that kind of self-injurious behavior. Often children with ASD can be seen just biting their hand or banging their head and not even crying, not even having to seem that they are even feeling any pain. Now those kind of behavior are mostly obsessive in nature, and then usually a low dose selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor is the first treatment of choice as far as the pharmacotherapy is concerned. Now, as far as the psychotherapy and the behavioral therapy part is concerned, I would suggest that our next panelist, Dr. Rituparna, should answer that question. So when her turn will come, I think we can take that question at that time. Or maybe she can answer now.
Yeah. So going forward to the next question from probably a parent. What language can we use for speech development, as there is no particular script in our mother tongue? Okay, Ms. Morang, can you say what is your mother tongue, I guess? What language can you use for speech development, as there is no particular script in our mother tongue? So this is a question related to speech therapy.
There is no particular script. This is a question to Manashi, I would say.
Yeah, this is a question for the speech language pathologist. Mansi, I think you can answer that.
Yeah, I would like to know from which community she belongs. I mean,
so it's Morang Hongsha.
Maybe she can question that to your directly to you.
Directly she can question me. So in case they don't have a particular language, I mean the mother tongue, they can obviously go for Hindi and English, because anyways even our children are picking up Hindi and English as a second and third language. So why not a child pick up Hindi or English as the first language? So I mean that would be my answer. Okay, Chandana, just for the information, we have a meeting till 6:45. So can
yes. Yeah, I'm wrapping up almost. There is one last question. Sir, as a therapist, when do I discuss with parents to review with consulting doctor for pharmacological management for aggressive or hyperactive or self-stimulatory behavior for which child is receiving sensory motor approach or sensory integration therapy? Mansi, I think you can ask this question directly.
Sorry?
This Mansi, the occupational therapist.
Okay.
Yeah, she has asked this question. So I'm saying that at any time, I mean, I think it's a collaborative approach or team approach of management that is what works everywhere. So even as an occupational therapist or any therapist, I'm sure that while the therapy is going on, a psychiatrist, or neurologist, or pediatrician is also part of the team, and he also reviews the child on a regular basis. So any kind of repetitive, aggressive, and self-injurious behavior need to be always reviewed with the treating doctor as well, because these behavior can lead to sometimes trauma, and that can lead to that could have its own implications. It could lead to head trauma, and we have seen children with autism spectrum disorder with having head trauma followed by other complications of head trauma. So every self-injurious behavior need to be assessed and reviewed by the treating doctor, clinician also, and need to weigh the pros and the cons of starting pharmacotherapy, because there are certain nihilistic approach, I would say, by certain clinicians as well as certain therapists, that medications would rather make the child more dull and will hinder into the therapy. But I would say that any clinician with good amount of experience knows what dose and what medication to prescribe, so that the child does not become overtly dull and does not hinder in his therapy.
Right.
So we need to balance it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation and all the question answers. And this is really insightful, and specifically because diagnosis of autism is a challenge, and we are not much aware about the comorbidities and so this is your speech enlighten us regarding that sectors. Thank you so much, and we will definitely discuss more. But now I would like to invite Dr. Rituparna to speak on the topic on socio-economic domains in autistic adolescents and adults, which is like, we most of the time we ignore this part. We are more focused on the children, like, on the diagnosis part. But many times these parents, they face a lot of challenge while they attain puberty, while they, go into the teenage. So Dr. Rituparna, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I guess I'm clearly audible.
You're audible, but I'm not able to see you.
Just a second. I had put the video off. Okay. So basically, I won't take much time, and already a lot of insightful things have been shared by our speakers, Dr. Samir and Dr. Avinash. So I don't have much to say in detail. What is autism and what are the characteristics and diagnosis and treatment and anything per se. Everything has been covered. Without taking much time, I don't have a presentation. I just jotted down a few points to share with you all. What I always feel that in autism, what comes in our mind, the first thing is that children, of course, it's a pervasive developmental disorder. It starts from childhood, but many a times, we keep on ignoring the socio-emotional concerns that autistic children face during teenage, puberty, and adulthood. So I thought that just to give you a glimpse about how parents should manage that with autistic teens and what are the concerns they face during that part of their age. Because many a times it's seen, if autism is diagnosed initially in the development years, in the formative years, still a lot of therapy and treatment is there to handle children when they grow up as well. But suppose it's a mild level of autism and it's not diagnosed initially, or it gets ignored by any chance. And then they start manifesting some sort of tremendous behavioral and social concerns in their teens and when puberty sets in. So how to work on that? I would just discuss a few things. We all know that autistic teenagers, they will always have a stronger mood swing than the typically developing teenagers. So that is something we need to understand. But at that point of time, if they are taught to handle these emotions, like how we are handling to identify, understand, and manage these emotions accordingly, that would be really beneficial for them. Now, coming to the signs or some of the symptoms that are observed in autistics during teenage, first and foremost, they will have difficulty in social interaction and communications. They will have a very restrictive pattern of behavior. Then at the same time, there will be difficulty in adjusting in the social milieu as well as in the workplace or as students in their educational setup. Very, very important is that these manifestations or these behavioral concerns, even if they are not major during childhood or they are ignored or they are not seen, may come up during the age of 11 to 13 years, as I said, during puberty. Also, they have a lot of difficulty during this time in interpreting what others are thinking and feeling. So if 2-3 people as a peer group are sitting, they may just stay mum, or they may not be able to understand or interpret the facial expressions or the body language or the social cues that are being given by the person sitting in front of them of their same age group. So in total, I would say there would be a difficulty in regulating emotions, which is very, very important to understand. Also, we should understand one more thing is that children, adolescents who are high functioning autistics may have high levels of, behavioral and emotional disturbances. Now, many times, many parents, they ask me, does autism get worse as a child grows up? See, the behaviors may improve with proper interventions during school years. But what happens, they can get deteriorated during the hormonal changes that happens to every person during the pubertal stage. So we have to be very careful as caregivers and parents to understand those concerns they may face during this part of adolescence, because we all know that adolescence itself comes with a lot of crisis. And it's a very popular saying that an adolescent is not a child, not yet an adult. So they are in the juncture of a crisis where they themselves have a lot of identity crisis. They don't know what they actually are. So in this particular point, with an autistic teenage, they will be struggling with two things that we as parents have to understand. They will be struggling with the crisis that adolescent in itself brings for every child at this age. And at the same time, because of their developmental delays and other socio-emotional concerns, they will have a double-fold problem to deal with themselves and with their society. So that can lead to a lot of maladjustment in them. So basically, very important as parents, what we need to do when teenagers are manifesting autistic traits or they are diagnosed in childhood, but still during teenage, they are having some extreme crisis. First of all, try to make your teen a part. Try to develop the personality of that teen. How do you do that? Let your teen understand actually who they are. Very, very important is to accept the person you are. And as a teen, they develop that intellectual skill. So you need to make them understand how they are, who they are, so that they learn to love and accept themselves when they are feeling worried of not being able to fit into the society. So they have a lot of issues. They may not express because they have restrictions and expressions as well. But internally, these stress things get accumulated wherein they are unable to, fit into the society. They are unable to express. So you have to take the first step to make them understand and accept the person they are and to love themselves. You have to teach them to love and understand and support themselves along with a very cordial and supportive environment. Seek help. Even if they are diagnosed later or later in their period of life, during their teenage and adulthood, if you can see those traits in them, seek help. There's nothing to feel embarrassed, because as a parent, as a caregiver, if you feel embarrassed, the embarrassment becomes double fold for the person who is actually having the concern. Very, very important is to monitor the development or the developmental things they are showing in a checklist of developmental milestones. That's very important. Also to understand as a parent or a caregiver that there is nothing as an impairment or deficit. If there's something that needs to be worked upon, we need to focus on their concerns and work accordingly. I'm continuously emphasizing this point that as a teen or an adolescent autistic child, make them feel loved and accept themselves, because if you do it for them, they will do it for themselves. Educate yourself. There's a lot of ways you can educate yourself to understand how you can train your teenage autistic child. Do some open conversations with them. Never do closed conversations, because in any which ways they have emotional restrictions. Try to discuss topics openly with them so that they get a ground to verbalize. They will get an opportunity to at least try. They will learn to verbalize their feelings. That's very, very important. And suppose if they have verbal or writing deficits, then it's very important to observe their behavioral concerns, what triggers those behavioral reactions, and then train them accordingly. As very well discussed by Dr. Sameer and Dr. Avinash, how we need to treat their anxiety and depression, that I will come in my later discussion. Also very important is to help them as a parent to find out those coping mechanisms, to work on their behaviors which are disrupting or hindering their ability to succeed in their areas of interest. Trust me, they are also like us. They have also areas of interest, but because of their restrictive patterns of behavior, they feel frustrated, they cannot work. So you need to help them to identify those disruptive patterns of behavior that are getting triggered because of some emotional reactions, and to work on those thoughts, feelings, and actions, so that they can come up and explore their areas of interest and become productive members like us in the society. Very, very important. Don't yell at your teenagers. This I would say for every parent, irrespective of whether their child is developing on a desirable developmental scale or they have some issues. Don't yell at your teenager. Don't make them feel ashamed or embarrassed. Give them the space and understand them. Even if they are having deficits, you need to give them that space and understand them. Very, very important. Include them in your family events. Your child, especially children, teenagers with autistic traits or any neurodevelopmental concern, need to learn real life experiential training. In order to teach them those self-help skills, you have to involve them in some household tasks, in something that will instill some sort of confidence and empower them with sense of responsibility, which will actually help them when they grow up. Respect their boundaries, be consistent and supportive towards them, because they are facing a double challenge when they grow up. That's very, very important. You have to give them a very positive and accepting environment. Remember, as Dr. Dalwai rightly said, autism is nothing, and it's not a medical condition that only needs treatment. It's a diagnosis that many people fail to understand. So we are on the verge of creating sensitization awareness. We need to understand that this particular area still many people fail to understand, and if as parents we are not sensitive enough, we are not sensible enough to understand this, then it becomes very difficult for these children when they grow up during their teenage and adulthood years to cope up with the society. Make them feel loved, accepted, understood, and supportive. A therapy part I will discuss a bit. Yes, cognitive behavior therapy is a part of treatment during teenage years, and as well as in adulthood. It doesn't work much with children because it helps them to learn the connection between the thoughts, feelings, and actions. They will learn how to identify those negative thoughts and feelings that is triggering an undesirable pattern of behavior, and to find an alternative positive behavior to work on their skills and to help them function more effectively in the society. So treatment for teenage autistics, for adult autistics, would be a combination of behavioral therapy with family therapy, developmental therapy, medicine, and obviously social skills training, wherein they may still need speech therapy, occupational therapy, etc. Because that's very important. So the best thing is to teach them directly, through modeling, role playing, and coaching. That is very important, because if you model behaviors, it's very, very easy and beneficial for them to understand and catch. Make them discover their self. That's very, very important. You can also use social stories to help them work, with themselves, because you can give them an, give them a situation wherein they can just come up and, you can ask them, then this is the situation, you tell me what can be the next thing. So as a teenager, it will help them to explore their mindset, and they may come up and speak and get that platform, because that will help them to understand also, the cause and effect relationship between their behavior and the positive and negative reactions of others. Because that thing needs to be established, that this behavior of mine, how much it is affecting me and others. And if something is triggering my negative emotions, what should I do to work on it? You will show them the way, but give them the onus to do it as a teenager. Because even if they are having concerns, but if you treat them as same as other children, so that their limitations can be overpowered by whatever strengths they have, because I'm sure all children with special with any sort of disabilities or with special concerns have a lot of creativity inside them. So if you enhance those things, it will be easy for them to empower themselves and overpower their negativity and their undesirable behavior patterns. Also, as Dr. Dalwai said, yes, positive reinforcement is very, very important. Reinforcement, I would just try to tell here, emphasize, it's not about good or bad behavior. It's not about doing anything good or bad. Reinforcement means, positive reinforcement means to add something to get a desirable change, and negative reinforcement is to take something away so that some undesirable pattern of behavior gets stopped. So you need to provide a lot of positive reinforcement to autistic children, teenagers, especially to reinforce their desirable pattern of behavior, to reinforce what they actually do well, catch them being good. I always believe in this, caption. If you catch them being good, if they are doing something good, reinforce that and break the larger skills into smaller ones, because that will always help them. It will be easy for them to achieve goals. You can always help them to make a goal recorder or an activity scheduling, table, wherein they judge their own performance one day at a time, because that's very, very important. When a desirable goal is added, it increases the likelihood of further desirable behaviors. So positive reinforcement is very important. Setting personal goals. If you teach them to set personal goals for themselves one day at a time, it will empower them to make positive choices, which will help them to reach their desired goals and be happy one day at a time. And that will enhance their acceptance. That will enhance their self-confidence and self-esteem. Because trust me, with these concerns, they suffer a lot when they grow up. So the daily tracker, points as goals, you need to teach them that they need to just jot down every morning, these are the 2 tasks I need to do. This will help them and make them understand so that they can focus on concrete tasks. Don't give them too much of abstract tasks, because that confuses them. They don't understand so much of abstract ideas. Give them concrete tasks. It will be easy for them to achieve and feel and it will lead to that need to be needed thing. They will start accepting themselves. That's very, very important. And actually, if you teach them positive reinforcement during their growing up years, it helps a teenager with such concerns with autism to enhance their autonomy and empower themselves without needing any external validation from anyone. They don't need it. If they are happy with what their achievements, if they are doing it, they are self-sufficient, they don't need external validation. And if positive reinforcement actually teaches them to become autonomous, to become imbibe that independence and to function, it instills a lot of autonomy within them. So that's very, very important. So yeah, these are the things I thought, because I chose this topic, socio-emotional concerns, because I feel this part gets a little neglected when we discuss about autism, because as adults, how do we manage them? As parents, how do we manage my teen who is having autistic traits? So I just shared few of my points. If Chandana has to ask anything,
yeah, thank you so much for the speech. Actually, you answered all my stored questions. So, like, even you just covered the part where I was thinking of asking you about behavioral therapy, about applied behavioral analysis, and you actually mentioned very beautifully about positive reinforcement, about negative reinforcement, how we break down the task goal settings into small chunks. So you actually covered the entire ABA thing. So and I just I just want you to deliver this particular awareness to the parents present here, that how ABA is so important, so that they can train themselves in ABA, so that they can utilize it among their children. It's not only the children with ASD, even the teenager, any teenager without a typical, neurotypical, any neurotypical children also, they also struggle a lot during teenage. And for a child without any kind of developmental disorders, even ABA helps, because what we don't understand in our culture is discipline is not equivalent to punishment, and we don't really know how we can actually train our children to be to acquire this kind of skills. First we have to acquire those skills, so that we can transfer the same skill to our children. So I would like you to, you actually covered everything. That is what it is. If you go to a specialist, if you go to an, yes, yes. Dhruva, you are unmute. Okay. So that part you have already covered, Dr. Rituparna. So I thank you so much for beautifully covering everything from this particular neglected aspect of socio emotional development of children with autism, as well as parents' importance of learning their skills as well. So I'm taking the I would like to go to our next speaker, Dr. Manju Dhondial, ma'am, who is the Deputy Director of NIPSIT, Guwahati. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you very much. Reverential panelists along with me and dear parents here. I was just wondering, Madam Manasi, please do not feel that your voice hadn't reached us. We do know 6:45 is the time we need to close, and I will surely close it by then. But I just wanted to say one thing, my dear friends. It is about the way forward. All of us need to come together. I was just wondering whether this was a conference which was happening amongst the medical fraternity in the beginning, but what a lovely thought sharing that was being done. And I'm so sure many of the parents and teachers here, I was told the majority of the participants are parents and teachers. And I was wondering whether they would ever get this opportunity for the kind of deliberations that happened over here. My dear friends, I just wish to remind you that early intervention affords the best opportunity to deliver benefits across lifespan so far as ASD is concerned. When we talk about autism spectrum disorder, the moment is a disorder, there has to be an orderliness into it. I would be more in line with what my previous speaker had been speaking about, and would address it to the parents here more. And I would love them to remember that most important thing I feel is to strengthen the mothers, because they tend to serve as the child's case manager and his or her advocate. So, my dear friends, some kind of a capacity building will need to be done. So rightly said in the beginning of the session, when it had just opened with such beautiful thoughts that came across, stating that at the end of it, the child is going to be with the family. So it is an intervention which needs to be carried forward at home as well. So just running diagnosis, all that, I simply was fan of that statement where it came, that let us not label. Why are we hurrying about labeling? Forget it. We know the symptoms. Let's take them on and then let's enable them. And enabling a child will never be able to be possible until you take the family along. And that is what Dr. Rituparna was just talking about. It is about the family therapy which needs to go on. My dear friends, let's remember it is building a consistent structure and routine therein. And that has to be done by all of us here. There is no dearth of provisions. Believe me, we have beautiful laws. We have the Department of Health working in it. We have the Department of Social Welfare working on it. We have the Department of the whole Ministry of Women and Child Development working on it. We are talking about, we are the signatories of the UNCRC. We say that it is a right of the child to live with dignity. Every child has a right to survive. He has a right to be protected, to develop, to participate. And in all these processes, these rights need to be given by the medical fraternity as well as the parental fraternity. All of us need to come together to do that. And I think that is where skills need to be built in a very, very big way. My dear friends, there are pressures and stresses across the spectrum of care, be it the family, be it the school, be it the health setup. Now, this child who has a sensitivity to changing environment, this child who really doesn't wish to come around across so many people, just hates changes. But then can we really have a society which is geared to this specific need? I would say, let us come to a scenario where we are able to do early detection the best way. We have the early childhood care education policy. We have beautiful early childhood stimulation activities going on. We have a lot of government programs which actually help the parents to see that they are able to stimulate the child in the right manner. We have frontline workers who are working on it. But my dear friends, when I talk about we have, somewhere I drop my head in shame because that doesn't actually happen in the field. Somewhere you and I have failed. It is not about the non-doing of the wrong people. I think it is about the non-doing of the right people. And here, when it comes to create an environment where we are able to accept the child the way he or she is, because they didn't ask us to be brought here in the world. They have come in up with a particular situation. We need to accept them there. And I suppose the hardest part of the journey, where one of the parents had also asked and probably got missed out here, where they said, how do we break the news? That is problem. My dear friends, to my mind, building the groups, the parental support groups, is a very, very big effort in this direction. I would like to share the experiences that we had at National Institute of Public Cooperation and Child Development, the regional center here at Guwahati. We have a child guidance center. Thanks to COVID, we learned new lessons then. And we had groups of parents. I don't know whether I should say parents. Actually, it eventually became mothers. And those mothers were so smart, who learned how to use the WhatsApp, were able to interact with us. And it was simply a very beautiful journey. And I suppose we were able to bring some light into the darkness which was added into the lives of these special children. So we had special groups for children with different disabilities, and the teamwork worked wonderfully. We had the psychiatrists, we had the special educator, the clinical psychologist, the speech therapist, the physiotherapist, everybody coming in. And we brought them all together. All cases we brought in to say that, well, how do you develop your immunity? And brought in parents also to do that. Because ultimately, just as it was said, you have to model it for them. But then the predicament is too high. My dear friends, especially the parents and the teachers, a very tall order for you. I only can wish you good luck to be able to take these things along with the kind of sensitivity and in the finest possible nuances that could be done. We require to watch the milestones. That's what they say. Reliably, you will be able to diagnose ASD by 2 years. But then our 90% cases are diagnosed only after 4. So we have lost that window right in the beginning. Who is going to help us? It is going to be the pediatrician. But my dear friends, pediatrician comes later, the mother comes before. And that is where I think we need to build the parenting skills, where we need maybe some kind of an intervention which will need to be done by W. Pratiksha, the way you're doing such wonderful work here. All of us need to come together to see how we can reach out to the pregnant and lactating women, tell them what are the milestones, where do they leave it? Because until and unless they see things amiss, pediatricians will not be able to do anything. All the world, pediatricians do everything. But if there is not that skill and the parents are not being counseled for it, because it is a very hard journey. So how do we help these parents? I think this is something I'm looking into the time as well. Yes. So I think I would just like to say one more thing here is a repeat part of it. There is a cost of autism, my dear friends. The cost of autism is in terms of special services, in terms of lost wages, in terms of transportation that needs to be done for the child to be coming in terms of the frustrations that probably are the building up in the caregivers. So whenever we are reaching to ASTs, let us all come together, the medical fraternity, the school fraternity, and the parents, along with all the people who are working for women and children in the country, to ensure that we make every child capable of reaching his potential. With these words, I thank you for giving me this opportunity and to be a part of this August gathering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That's, beautifully said. And actually, you're right. Out of every 54 children, one is, having autism spectrum disorder. So we need to create an autism-friendly society as well. And as also Dr. Dalwai has said, yes.
Chandanaji, just one thing here. I don't know. At time, I wish to talk about it, but then we didn't have that time. But it is not about how many children, what is the prevalence rate, 40% have it. Let's forget about that. But it is the world for this one child. It is his being, even this one child, and the parent for him, that is the world. I think that is where we need to work in. And yes, it is about him and less of her. So we also have to understand that and how dreams get shattered because of lots of efforts that are going into it. Beautifully talked about the gender concerns, about the women. How are they handling these issues? I think ASD has more to it than the percentages. Yeah. I think it has to do more with cares, concerns, and a kind of support groups that could be built up across the media, across the groups, across different people who are interested in the well-being of the society.
Yes, ma'am. You actually talked about the purpose of our webinar. That's why we invited the teachers. That's why we invited the parents specifically, because, we need to include everyone. We need an inclusive solution to it. And they are, yes, as all the panelists has said it in a very right way. It's not about leveling. They're not abnormal children. They have different needs. That's all. They're just different. And we need to understand that. And we need to create a friendly society. It's as you have just mentioned that for that child, the world is the world, right? So we can be more empathetic towards them as well. And at the same time, we are very much focusing on the child and its symptoms and how to manage that, while we are forgetting the parents. Whenever delivering the diagnosis, I normally say that whenever we get any kind of diagnosis, we tend up, we used to have tendency to blame the God, or blame our destiny, or we end up blaming each other. But when it comes to your child, you are a team. And when it comes to autism, a child with autistic spectrum disorder, we need all of us. Like, we need the teachers, we need the parents. It's not only limited to the therapists who are working with those children. So you have beautifully delivered that message that we need to hold hands together. I think the message has been conveyed in a very right way. Thank you so much, ma'am. And along with that, I think we are done with the panel discussion. Mansi, over to you. And yeah.
Thank you so very much, panelists, for this so very stimulating discussions. And I would like to thank everybody, Sir Samir Dalwai, Dr. Avinash, Manju ma'am, Rituparna, everybody, for joining us today and accepting our request to be a part of this webinar in a very, very short notice. Thank you so very much. We are looking forward to much more collaborative endeavors in the near future with you all. Thank you, the participants, for giving us your valuable time on your only rest day, that is Sunday. Thank you so very much, and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mansi, and thank you, Chandana.
Thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Chandana.